I hope you guys can hear me on Discord, and everyone can also hear me on the live stream. We are streaming on Rumble, we are streaming on YouTube, and we are streaming on Facebook under the Pangburn Universe. Firstly, I want to thank the person right next to me, which is Nick. He's a lifelong friend, uh, someone who I respect in their own right, has a degree in public policy, master's in public policy, an undergraduate in political science, someone who understands epistemology, cares about religion, the world, and all of that stuff. So he's always amazing to have on. And we thought that, today we will jump on the politics and religion server, which Pangburn has partnered with. And we want to thank the community here for letting us host our shows and do our events here. Our event for tonight is pretty simple. We're going to be taking, a chip off the old book, an atheist experience type of call-in show, where recently I made a video on YouTube exploring how the new atheists used to talk about science and how sometimes they talk about science today in regards to like scientific notions of transgenderism or the new woke stuff, which is just bullshit to call it that to begin with. But the reason where I'm bringing it up now again is so we thought to ourselves, yeah, I just rambled on. Basically, we're trying to bring a show on something similar to what the atheist experience used to do like 6 years ago. We thought it would be fun. So we urge everyone who, if you believe in God, call in. If you're a libertarian, call in. If you think politically there's something you want to talk to us about, call in and simply talk to us about. And there's going to be two ways for people to call us in. One way is through the guest invite link, which I put in the chat of the Discord here in Politics and Religion. And another way is simply to jump up into the speakers on Discord. We prefer the latter, the former. I prefer that you use the link for the EVMux that I put in. But other than that, like, we're gonna get started. Let me actually. Yeah, I think this is fine. We can turn our videos on. I can at least turn my video on Discord, which is fine. I'm gonna do that. Let me try to make. Oh, that's the wrong camera. Oh, ichs. Okay, let me fix the right camera up for Discord just so people see me. Video device. Let me change my video camera. There it is. 1 second. Oh. Well, I guess I don't have a video. I guess this is what just happened. Anyhow, well, the stream has our videos on it. So the first thing I wanted to start talking about is I wanted Nick and I to speak about. Tibber is Nick, by the way, everyone. I wanted us to speak about what is it that got you to like move away from like your pseudoscientific thoughts or like your notions of God? Like, how did your childhood begin with that?
Right. I think so. I pretty much grew up a Roman Catholic. It was. I don't think. I think there was. I think I grew up having a lot of doubt, but also being devout in my faith, with my within its own right. I think I always had a little skepticism towards organized religion and churches in general. Like my experiences in going to churches and taking part in religious ceremony in general, I felt I always had a little like trepidation, a little like a little what is this? This is actually kind of weird, like when you think about it. But I don't think, as far as like my thinking on the subject matter was concerned, I never really like explored it much deeper. I always felt like there was a god or something that could be considered a god, up until maybe my like late teens, early 20s. And I don't think I had any particularly traumatic experiences with religion, but I think I did go through a lot of shifts in my spiritual thinking. Like I grew up a Roman Catholic, eventually just kind of went into more of like a soft deism sort of uh uh belief, like there's something out there, but I don't really know how to describe it, until eventually, I kind of just finally admitted to myself that I really didn't have a good reason to believe in God.
I mean, I remember because Nick and I have known each other for a long time, and a part of that was as I came out of my faith. Nick was someone who I talked to. I grew up very Orthodox Jewish, and within that exploration, I also fell out of it because of I was kind of at a point in my life where it was kind of like, do I commit to like studying Judaism and like not going to university, or do I continue down this path of like academics? And
When was
within
that again? How old were you when you really
I
went
was
through
like
that?
19. I was like 19, right? So
When did we go on the cabin trip? Were we like 20? Was that around that time? Was that before or after the cabin trip? So context for that is there's a fond memory that we have going to a cabin trip many, many years ago now. I guess it's over 10 years ago, maybe around 10 years ago now. We went on a cabin trip to upstate New York. And I mean, this is nothing like, it's not like this was particularly significant in, most senses of the word, but on the way up, we had to stop for Danan to make, one of his prayers, his morning prayers when he was
yes.
still, Jewish or,
Well,
religiously Jewish.
at that time, I was actually like in between, but I was still like performing as if I was Jewish, right? I still like
Right.
had the veneer,
Okay, that's true.
putting on
Yeah.
tefillin every morning. I didn't really speak to people about it as much, but I was like struggling with my my
Right,
religiosity
that's
at the
true.
time. Very,
You're
very.
right. You're right. So
But
that had to be before then, right? When you started really thinking about that.
yeah, it was really when I my visa expired and I didn't have my green card yet, and I kind of had like this year and a half off from life where I couldn't go to school and I couldn't legally work. Where I kind of began, I was studying with rabbis in Queens at the time,
Hmm.
and that's kind of as I began studying more and more with them, I fell more and more and more out of my religious tendencies.
Right.
So So Muggles is saying between this or an Ahsoka watch party. I mean, this is obviously better than the Ahsoka watch party. We all can agree that
You can
Disney doesn't do anything good to
the
Star Wars, and you'll be
you
okay
can you
watching
can
it
always
tomorrow.
watch Ahsoka after the show.
That's true. It doesn't go away. The show does go away.
There's the interaction here though, that's temporary. We
But I
have to
also
make the most of it.
I found that with you, a part of your religious thinking was also accompanied with a lot of other bullshit. Like you believe that the moon landing was fake as well during that time period, did you not?
Yeah, so that that's the funny thing. I think I look back now on being younger and a lot more what I consider to be a lot more uneducated on the facts of the matter on a lot of things where I think it was really easy for me, and it's easy for a lot of people to fall into the trap of, belief in something without, without proportional evidence for the claim, and I think that's one of the major contributors to, religious thought, to heavily conspiratorial thought is, you know, people tend to take evidence, any sort of evidence, whether it's extraordinary or not, and the worst part, if it's not even a lot of evidence for a pretty big claim, people tend to believe in those things anyway, even without that, again, without that proportional evidence. So yeah, I definitely, I think I was really into watching Discovery Channel at the time, like the Ancient Alien show with that guy with the crazy hair, right? When it
Oh,
was like before
everyone's
the
favorite.
memes, you know what I mean? Before the memes, and when it was still like,
Yes,
like
yes.
like almost legitimate, for an impressionable young mind, that show was like mind blowing, you know what I mean? And that was in the early days, not the early days of the internet, but the early stages of like, information accessibility of the internet, pre 2005, you know what I mean? Or around 2005, pre 2005, where you would like look things up on Wikipedia, right? Wikipedia was starting to become a major like online encyclopedia, but it wasn't as robust in its like,
Correct.
and
Correct.
it's like linking to evidence, and it wasn't more stringent on the things, the editing that they allowed on the site as compared to now. So back then you couldn't really verify a lot of the things that were put on there. So you did like the surface level digging. Like I used to think the moon landing was faked, and I think the one thing that really convinced me was that, this whole bullshit with the Van Allen belt, like this
Oh,
cloud of radiation that was supposedly so thick you would need like 6 foot of lead in like a ship in order to like not have the astronauts, like blasted with radioactive material. Like there's just so many of these like half truths, pseudo truths that like, you don't understand when you're young, and it's not necessarily explained accurately, in the sources you're looking, and then you just start believing in, all sorts of crazy shit. I used to think Bigfoot like was likely true, like Loch Ness monsters. But the thing is, a lot of like my justification for that, like I didn't have valid justifications at the, you know, like I look back and I know I didn't have valid justification, and even at the time I was like, you know, maybe I don't have, like, this isn't enough of a good reason to believe, but I'm gonna believe anyway because this, like, it looks like it could be true, you know, just sort of like half-assing the epistemology, you know. So,
Hmm.
yeah, I mean, I believed in a lot of stuff. Honestly, I don't even remember. Like, I used to like just create things to believe in. You know what I mean? Like, oh, the God that I
With
believe in is
imagination,
like,
yeah, with imagination
you
as well.
know, just like use my, like, oh, the God I believe in is, you know, like that's what
Yeah,
sort of
yeah,
got me into my
yeah.
whole like deist sort of like phase. You know, like, oh,
So
God
for
is just
Catholic
everything.
traditionalists in the chat right now, being like, "Oh, why are these two atheists talking so?" Well, we're putting on a show. Give us like 15 minutes to
Well,
set the
I'm
boundary.
talking about my background. I'm
I
sorry if you
know,
just
exactly.
wanna.
If you just want to, that's fine. But you're just gonna have to be a little bit patient because we're not just talking about God tonight. We're also talking about politics because I think that a lot of religious thinking carries with like political baggage as well. I see it in my own family, the way in which my own parents and my own brother will weave in their religiosity, their Judaism with Israeli nationalism is very similar to the way in which I think fundamentalist people in the United States or even religious people in the United States weave their religion into politics and the roles that that plays. Um,
I
and I
mean,
know,
religion and politics are inexplicably tied. I mean, you look at some of the earliest, you know, government roles, like chaplains, like, you know, the tribal shaman, right? Like it, like having religion in government predates modern day institutions and modern day, what we consider modern day society. You know what I mean?
for sure,
So there's no denying it.
of course. So I found that like my own political the way I began to change the way I viewed the world politically was because of you. You know, we were roommates together in college, and you were taking political science. Started out journalism, and I think I just didn't have a good understanding while I like, you know, I learned science and I was a psych major and I knew how to look at like research. I didn't understand how to tell the difference between legitimate political claims or journalistic claims as opposed to non-legitimate ones. And it's that same mechanism of being able to make sense of the evidence around you that led me to change my views politically. I was much more center right wing when I was that age, and as I moved out of it, just kind of embracing the same scientific standards and academic rigor towards those disciplines.
Right. Right.
You currently work at the New York State Assembly.
I do. I do. You know, like Danan said, I started off with journalism, and that, you know, really sort of changed the way I evaluated evidence. I mean, I was an atheist before then, and I think I was, you know, a secular, a skeptic in general, well before I started, you know, before I, you know, changed my career path essentially, and uh, you know, the concept that there was this concept that we learned in news literacy courses called it basically it was like it was like a parallel drawn to the hurricane that hit New Orleans back in the early 2000s, or Hurricane Katrina, right?
Yeah.
Hurricane Katrina like devastated New Orleans, and there was a news story that came out at the time that basically people were trapped in the stadium that's there, the football stadium. There
Hmm.
was a news story going around. People like fled to safety at the stadium, went into like this like around the stadium rather. It was this like I don't know if it was a restaurant or a grocery store or something, and people got trapped in like a freezer, and people like news was like all of the major like news organizations like New York Times, like what, you know, all the major news organizations were reporting that there were people trapped in like this freezer there, right?
And that was just
And
false.
then one journalist went to go actually check it out, and there was nobody in this fucking freezer, or any, like, I don't think any freezers at all. So
Okay.
the slogan at, you know, the school of journalism I went to is "Open the freezer," which
I,
is really just, you know, an example to show, like, you know, you can't really believe anything until you know, quote unquote, see it for yourself.
until you open, and that's the parallel. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. And
So
you know that, yeah, that really shaped my skepticism in a positive way, I think.
I hear you. So all of those were mad that were fluent in Japanese. You see, it's been 15 minutes, and now we're going to open the show to callers. So you can call about politics, religion. Just tell us what you believe and why you believe it, and we can have a discussion about it. Um, We're going to bring you in through the Discord. You'll talk to us. I'll invite you up to speak. Please try not to talk over each other. I don't want to have to mute anyone or kick anyone for any of those reasons. So we might have a little glitch and technical issues on the back end, so just give us a few seconds to set everything up, and we'll continue the conversation. So I know that VM was here first, and I know Catholic Traditionalist has been very annoyed about the whole thing. So I'm just going to any mo it, and I guess we'll bring in Thinker. That's what I think, Thinker Cat. So I'm going to invite you up to speak. Hello, Thinker Cat.
Hello? Can
Hello.
you hear me?
I can hear you.
Hi.
Nick, can you hear Thinker Cat?
I can.
Okay. I think you should be able to be heard on the stream as well. I believe so. So, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay, I was
Perfect.
listening to what you were saying about evidence needed to believe,
Mm-hmm.
and I that's a big issue. Maybe more in the younger generations of people. We were all brought up academically, right, through university and stuff. Like my generation and on tend to be more educated. So the more educated we are, the more we do naturally want evidence, and there's actually nothing wrong with that, and asking questions and doing. And when I grew up as a Christian teen, there wasn't any of that around. Like, you didn't feel like you could approach ministers and ask them, because sometimes it's like, I don't think they knew either. They weren't taught about the evidence. Evidence wasn't a big thing. People just believed. That's how the past generations were raised, to believe without question. And they didn't, even our parents, like generations, like they couldn't probably answer a lot of questions. And it's through university that I actually solidified my faith. Like, I was a Christian before, raised as a Christian child, Catholicism and then Protestant Christianity. But I think I was really looking for reasons to believe. So it's not just my parents' faith. I wanted to know, was there anything behind this? And I studied like chemistry, biochemistry, cell level and stuff like that. And I just couldn't reconcile what I'm seeing with evolution theory, because I studied human genetics, human evolution, all of those subjects, part of my major, and couldn't reconcile it with random evolution. And the fact is, today we've got a lot more skeptical, especially those people who've done biochemistry, cell level. What we're talking about here, complexity, the human genome. Since we've uncovered the human genome as well, it's far more complexity, coding like complexity. There is no way you can explain that with neo-Darwinian evolution. And we've got a lot of skeptical scientists and Jewish scientists, Christian ones and others, some not even having a faith background, that can see it, that it cannot be explained by that theory. And it doesn't matter how many millions of years, billions of years you give it, it cannot produce the complexity that we have in the world today, and the coding, the level of coding, and the fact that you need a lot of things together at the same time. There's no way they can randomly evolve. Like, even in the time frame, you can give it millions, billions of years. It doesn't make a difference.
So are you saying?
So what's the question?
Yeah. So are you saying that because there lacks an explanatory power with evolution, for example, then we should accept the position of God did it, or Christ did it, or Yahweh did it?
If we're looking at probability on the basis purely of probability, because you can't prove it either way, obviously, because we can't put God into the scientific method. He's outside of it. So, but I say the probabilities are stacked against evolution theory, and now are actually much more in favor of a creator. And I'd say, why not the creator of the Bible? Because it's and I've read the Bible now, second time through, and reading through the Old Testament, read the New Testament a number of times. It's all very credible, and it reads like a historical narrative. The whole thing reads like a historical narrative.
Okay, so
I don't know about that. Could I come onto that? I don't know about it sounding like a historical narrative, but just so I understand what you're saying, are you saying that? We could maybe we can get. Yeah, maybe we can get there.
We'll just have a discussion. Let's let Tiber talk for a second.
Yeah, maybe we can get there, but I just want because that was a statement, a claim, and usually those require evidence. But I digress. I was really interested in I'm trying to make sure I understand what you're saying. So is it basically that because like evolution as the way like humans have come about, So because of the low likelihood, essentially, like the randomness involved, the low likelihood of it, that it seems to imply that it couldn't actually have been like, because of how specific. So are you basically talking about fine tuning? Is this the fine tuning argument?
Fine tuning is universe, but there's fine tuning. It's like fine tuning at the
Right.
micro level. At the micro level of if you look through a microscope, right, the micro world and everything.
Okay.
And even a bacterial cell is it's not that simple. It's complex, right? Cell wall and all these stuff coming together. It's just very highly unlikely, improbable that it can.
I mean, I don't think that it's highly unlikely. I think that's the issue with the fine-tuning argument that a lot of people make, is that people claim that, oh, just the way that it's so complicated that it must be, it just can't have possibly been done by chance. But in order for you to suggest that it couldn't have been chance, you need to be able to like demonstrate that there's another option. You know what I mean? Like, just because we're not aware of all of the ways that this could have happened, because the truth is, like, abiogenesis is still a fledgling sort of theory on the origin of life, right? Like, we don't really have all of the details or the full story on the origin of life. So any potential candidate explanations we're just not simply aware of. A large majority of the potential candidate explanations we're probably not even aware of. Like, there are probably arguments that we will make that, are wrong, but we just don't have enough information to even make those hypotheses yet, So in order for us to reject like a natural cause for these things, we need to be able to show that all the possible candidate explanations are false, right?
And I also want to add to that a second thing, not to overwhelm you, you can respond, that when we talk about probability, I mean, you went to school, you got to give me a denominator. What is the set of possibilities by which you're even drawing this probability? Because the possibility of this happening through natural selection seems to actually, I can display that possibility. But the possibility of God, that possibility has yet to even been demonstrated to be considered within the probability of this entire situation, right? What is the denominator? What are the possible outcomes? You have to demonstrate those possibilities first.
Either life came from non-life, right? And that's what abiogenesis. Abiogenesis is basically just the spontaneous generation theory, which is debunked, rehashed.
No,
in new form.
I don't think that's what abiogenesis is. I don't think that's what that is. It's like you just said. Abiogenesis, I think, is about the study of the origin of life, as in like living organisms coming from non-living matter. But whatever else you said there, like, I think that might have been a little twisting of what abiogenesis is about,
Well,
like we're talking about like from non-life, but non-life doesn't mean like, like a rock, you know what I mean? Not necessarily.
It could be protein, it could be whatever it
is. Right.
Life has come from non-life, and in the right proportions, and in the chirality, like there's certain molecules and compounds that only in one form, like right hand or left hand, and in nature you only get one form. That's like things are designed, like everything points to design. In so many ways it points to design, and it's just logical. Either you have a designer, a creator, or you don't. There isn't a whole lot of probabilities.
I don't wait here. So we went from fine tuning to that there has to be a creator. So I guess we could drop the fine tuning for a second, because I don't see how the fine tuning argument has even met the sort of like rigor, like philosophical rigor, to prove that a god exists. But the whole thing about, what was it, that
only really the two possibilities created themselves, or there is a creator. And it just, the far more logical view for me is that there is a creator.
What makes it more logical, though? Like, what makes that theory more logical to you?
Things like, have you studied like irreducible complexity, like things that have to actually be together at the same time to have come about?
Okay, yeah, I'm aware of irreducible complexity, yes.
So you think lots of examples.
You think that irreducible complexity, the problem of irreducible complexity, points to a god?
Well, it's just logical. If you just think about it, because that certain things have to be together, and there's no way that you could have one bit evolved and then another bit you wait another million years for the other thing to come about. Or thousands or whatever years. I mean, basically, you don't have a viable organism if you're waiting around for a whole bunch.
Tinker, why not? Tinker, why not? right?
Done.
We can no. You're saying that it's logically impossible without giving us the logical impossibility. Like in the same way that it's in the same way that you can logically conceive of a magical being in the sky making things and making them complex and evolving them, we can think of natural forces that don't need that. But you're saying that one is more likely than the other without even demonstrating the possibility of the other. Natural selection as a thing is demonstrable. I can show you things evolve. I can support that theory. But to say that a god did it, you still have to show us the god.
My thing is, though, even if we granted you intelligent design, even if we granted you irreducible complexity, even if we granted you, all those arguments, it still doesn't get us to the Christian God is the God. You know what I mean? Like, because all of these arguments aren't even establishing that it's the Christian God. They're simply establishing that there may be something that I guess you could define a God as. But,
there's in Genesis that he's the God that created everything. The whole universe is pretty much given it, and the whole
but there's a ton of other books that say that too, right? Like there's a ton of other books that are supposedly written like coming from inspiration from a god or gods, and I mean, like, why not the Quran? Like, why don't you believe in the Quran? You know what I mean?
Why not the Bhagavad Gita, right? Why not?
They all claim they are all books claimed to be written as voices of their gods. And at the end of the day, all they really have are the words written in those books to support the claim.
Well, it's not just that, but it's New Testament, like historical evidence, right, of Christ.
What's the historical evidence of the New Testament?
Well, it's historical claims and all that, records and everything that's been kept. I mean, maybe you've got to look. William Lane Craig actually does a very good defense of it. So he's probably got one of the best. I don't think William Lane
Craig does a very good defense of it at all, and I've listened to him talk about it. The thing is,
one second before
there's
no 1 second. Okay. Before we move on. So we're dropping the whole. It's logically more possible. There's a higher probability that God did it, right? We're dropping that because you recognize that's not how you prove God. If you want to talk about the historical evidence of the New Testament or the Torah, we can get into that. But it's a whole other thing.
No, I think we should. You know why, Dandan? Because at the end of the day, again, we can sit here and talk for hours about ID, talk for hours about, all of these other philosophical arguments. But at the end of the day, Thinker Cat believes in the Christian God, and I'd rather talk about what she believes and why.
Okay, fine.
So I want to get down to her specific belief and what her justifications are for that.
Look, archaeology, for example, like they keep discovering things, right, that confirm things like Solomon's temple and different things like that they're uncovering, right, that actually date to the biblical times. So I think archaeology is a big thing in favor of it.
Even if they found Solomon's temple, even if they found Jesus's tomb, which I don't think they found Jesus's tomb. People have claimed to found Jesus's tomb like for years and years and years. I don't think they found Jesus's tomb. But even if they did find Jesus's tomb, even if I granted you that. No, I don't. I'm saying I don't think they have. I've looked extensively at the evidence, and Dandan, if you want to like do some like Google foo or something, so that we can actually show it.
It's fine.
But at the end of the day, I don't think they've shown Jesus' tomb. But the thing is, even if they did, I'm saying a hypothetical. Even if they did find Jesus' tomb, even if they did find Solomon's temple, even if there was a burning bush and there was video evidence of a burning bush, how does that prove that there is in fact a God, right? Because here's the thing, I'm not a mythicist, right? There are people who think that Jesus was like a mythical figure, didn't actually exist. I think Jesus actually existed. I think it's very likely that a person named Jesus, a rabbi, right, who completely changed, many things in the course of history with his words, existed. I think there is most likely a Jesus who spread a word, who was a rabbi who spread a word. But we do have evidence we do have historical record of a man from Jesus of Nazareth, right? A record of this man being born, and then supposedly, I think there's a record of him, of an execution speaking about it. But that's pretty much all we've got in terms of historical evidence. Like everything from the Gospels, the first Gospel was written like 50 years after the supposed death of Jesus. Now, even if you found Jesus's tomb, so what? There's hundreds and hundreds of tombs of people who were killed, who were crucified. How does that tell us anything about the miraculous claims that are found in the Bible?
Okay. Quran is actually written, hundreds of years or something after thing, and it came much later in time, and a lot of it's borrowed from Old Testament and the New, and then other things are distorted in there. That's why I don't believe in the Quran as being credible, and it's laden with agendas and everything. But the Bible and all, it was all written within a short space of time of the actual eyewitnesses. And I think a really good book I recommend is Josh McDowell's book on this. And
there are no eyewitnesses. There are no eyewitnesses. People wrote, whoever wrote the Bible said there were eyewitnesses, but we don't actually have any eyewitness testimony.
They were eyewitnesses at the time that it was written, and it's in a very short time period.
But no. The most there is somebody writing after the fact that there were eyewitnesses at the time. Am I wrong, Dandan, in the Old Testament? Is that the case? You're more scholarly on this.
You're not wrong, but I think that if you're going to appeal, I know it might be lag happening and people aren't hearing each other. So go ahead.
Eyewitnesses.
You're saying there were eyewitnesses.
Matthew and Jesus were there at the time. At the time of Jesus.
This is what, for example, Jews use in an argument for why they know God gave the Torah to Moses on Mount Sinai. They know because they say there were like 1 million witnesses sitting there watching the miracles at Mount Sinai, right? But that's what it says in the book. That doesn't mean that there were actually that many witnesses.
Because to me, that's the equivalent of us going to a courtroom, right, for a murder case, and then somebody's evidence that the defendant committed the murder was them pulling out a book where somebody wrote that they know who killed him and it was that guy. Like, would that be enough evidence to convict a man of murder if somebody submitted evidence of somebody who wrote they know who the witness was and the witness said that it was this guy that did it? Because that's what this amounts to at the end of the day, right? There's no.
They were his disciples, so they wrote about it. So they are credible witnesses.
I don't think that's how that works.
Okay, that's like me bringing a book to a court case for murder and saying that the defendant, Donald Trump, murdered Joe Biden in cold blood. Like me bringing a book that said, I know a guy that who saw Donald Trump kill Joe Biden in cold blood. Like, that's basically what that is. Like, so what? Just because the person who is claimed to have been a witness was somebody important and of relevance to the story doesn't mean that actually even happened at all, right? Because all we're submitting as evidence is a book claiming that the eyewitnesses saw it. There were a bunch of people that saw it. There are hundreds of thousands of books, like the Bhagavad Gita, right, that have these extremely similar claims. Oh, there are people who saw this miraculous thing happen. There are hundreds of religions who have that same claim.
The resurrection, about 500 witnesses, and that's probably not including the women.
Okay, but we don't know that there were actually witnesses. There is a book saying there was 500 witnesses. There are no bones of these witnesses. There's no other supporting evidence actually showing there were 500 witnesses to this event. It's just a claim.
Would they have to lie? Were actually the disciples of Christ, and they also were willing to die for their faith. I mean, why?
Okay, but is somebody willing to die for their faith? Is somebody willing to die for their faith evidence that the faith is true?
I'm just saying these are credible reasons to believe that there is a lot more to it than. And I don't think you've heard any.
Are there people who have died for their beliefs and were wrong, and their beliefs were wrong?
So I'm
not calling these people liars. Are there people out there who aren't Christians, who aren't the disciples, who died for their beliefs, who sincerely believed in the things they died for, but they were wrong? Right? There are martyrs of other religions. Those martyrs were wrong, right? According to you, those martyrs were wrong, right? Their beliefs were wrong, but they sincerely believed in it and died for it anyway, right?
Yeah, but that's rare in other religions. This is different because there was like a huge amount of people, and then the whole Roman thing, and the fact that
Muslims say that there was a huge amount of people to witness Muhammad, and his miracles. I don't understand how this is more evidence than that, because they're saying the same thing. All of the evidence from these holy books, especially the Abrahamic religions, amount to there is there's a claim of people having been there and seen it, but there's no other corroborating evidence.
So
for
I
it.
guess I think what Tibber is asking, can you recognize? Sorry, I don't want to interrupt you. Go ahead.
There's a lot more to it. There's secular historians as well that confirm it, and these weren't people that were favourable to Christianity. There are other people that are mentioned in Josh McDowell's book. So I don't think you've read it, have you? What the actual evidence is. You're just scoffing at it, so you haven't read it.
There's only the Bible. There is only the Bible and what the Bible says. What is the corroborating evidence for the Bible?
One second, everyone. I feel like we're in a position where Tibber feels like you're not answering the question, and you feel like he's not hearing what you have to say. So we're gonna do this call maybe another 2 minutes or so, because I know other people want to come on, but let's stick to the point. Do you think that it's possible that someone could die for their sincerely held belief, and for that belief to be wrong?
Possible, but I think there's far too much to this story in the New Testament, because there's also prophecies, from the book of Isaiah, which you may be familiar with.
Before we move to prophecies, right? We talked about the irreducible complexity. We know Jesus, saying Jesus was God, rose from the dead because he, people died for his sins and were martyrs for it. But before we move on, there has been a few times where you brought up something, and when confronted with the reasons why it might be a little fallacious, you just jump to a new point of view. And I think that's why Tibber is getting frustrated. Right? Instead of moving on to prophecy, instead of moving on to, it says in the Bible that there were people at Mount Sinai. It says in the Bible that there were people there and eyewitnesses for the miracles. That's still not evidence of those eyewitnesses. Do you recognize that?
If you're in a court and you took a document from the actual people who were there at the time, and which is actually what they do in court, and you take that as credible witnesses when they actually put it in writing, and these people pretty much confirm they believe it. What reason would they have to lie?
That's not the same situation.
Yeah, that's a deposition.
That's a completely different
when you do a
situation.
deposition in court, is that I bring a
No,
witness.
that's not my point. My point is, when they take in a witness statement in a court, it's the witness who wrote the statement. When we're talking about the Bible, the witnesses didn't write the Bible. The Bible was written by anonymous authors. We don't know who wrote the Bible, but what we do know is that the first gospel was written almost 50 to 80 years after Jesus died. So at a minimum, the witness didn't write those statements. It's a guy who said that he knows who the witnesses are. So it's not the same example of going into a courtroom and taking a witness deposition. That's actually way more evidence than what you're claiming the Bible is doing.
That's just what they've been dated to, but they would have kept the records, and perhaps the books.
But there are no records. We don't. Even if they did keep the records, we don't have any of them. That's an assumption.
And it's by Matthew and John are actually his own actual disciples who wrote it, so they are credible witnesses.
No, they're not.
I don't think
we don't know any. We don't know any of the authors of the Bibles. So that's certainly the case for Matthew. We're pretty sure. We don't know if Matthew wrote it, but
I would urge you, thinker, to take a step back and try to falsify specific claims about, like, there were witnesses who saw Muhammad fly on a winged horse to chop the moon in half. Or there was witnesses who saw specific miracles done in, like, Shinto religions of Japan, where the gods themselves imbued specific powers with, like, the emperor. Even with Judaism, there are specific conflicting notions between Orthodox Judaism and Christianity. There's archaeological evidence of, like, idols in, like, 500 BC Israel. So with that, I want to give you the last word, because that's how I do on my show. So you can have the last word, say your last piece, keep it short, and then we'll move on to the next caller.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. There is archaeological evidence for a lot of those places and times and that are mentioned in the Bible. I'm talking about Old Testament, but also New Testament. And I mean, maybe more so for the Old Testament. Times, some of those places and things that they've uncovered. I mean, there's good, credible evidence out there.
Okay.
But, of course, skeptics explain it all away.
Okay.
But if you take it at face value, I mean, it is credible evidence that those times and things that happened in the Bible actually did happen.
Okay. Thank you, Thinker.
Thanks for your time, Thinker.
And thank you for being kind and courteous as always.
Okay. So think about it, and I just want to recommend that book that people have a look at that. Josh McDowell's evidence that demands a verdict actually answers a lot of these questions.
Okay.
And the things we're talking about. Yeah, it's very.
Thank you, Thinker, so much. We appreciate you as always.
I know you want to give her the last word, Dandan, but I will have to. But I just have
we're
to
gonna
say
say
to
something.
that.
We're gonna say something.
I just have to say one thing to that is that Harry Potter goes to platform 9 3/4 to take a magical train to Hogwarts. That is a fact written in a book. That was written in the book. So that means that platform 9 3/4 exists at King Cross, and that we can take that shit to Hogwarts. So I want to go. That's the next vacation I want to go to, man.
I also want to say, just because you find parallels in like mythology. I mean, I think I've heard this. This is like an old argument people might have heard. If you take Spider-Man's comic book, like a 2,000 years ago, from like dystopian society, and they just find records of like this pantheon of like comic books by Spider-Man, and the English language is barely dead. They don't have good records of it, and they're kind of deciphering what it is about. And they go, we found archaeological evidence of a New York City and of a Queens. Let it be, not right. And that doesn't give us evidence that Spider-Man exists.
And look, right? I'm not trying to beat on Thinkercat. I actually really appreciate that she came up here to talk about this stuff. And honestly, Thinkercat, I think you brought up a lot of important topics and points to talk about in general. I mean, like, you know, we started with, you know, intelligent design, some of the arguments for that. You know, I think on this show, what we would like to do is talk to people about their specific beliefs and talk about, you know, the reasons behind those specific beliefs. When we start getting into things like intelligent design, we're talking about like arguments for a god, but typically, you know, they're not like what people specifically believe in, or even the real arguments why people believe in what they believe, right? They're sort of like a post hoc rationalization for God. They're not necessarily like the reason you even started believing in the first place. I'm really interested in that, like the sort of like, you know, I don't know if this is the correct way to label it, but the sort of ontology of like what your belief is. You know what I mean? Like where did that originally come from? So, I appreciate you, Thinkercat.
I wanted to respond to Casey, by the way. They did make that a tourist attraction. You can actually find that at the train station, I think, in London. And that still doesn't verify that Harry Potter was a book. But regardless of the fact, he said, so wouldn't, I'm going to bring on Percy. Remember, the question is, what's your best reason for why you believe in God? You can talk to us about libertarianism. I saw you have 3 questions lined up. So let's go with that. I'm going to invite you in right now. Invite to speak. Percy,
what are we talking about? Did I miss that?
Percy, he wrote he outlined, they outlined, I don't want to assume, 3 specific points they want to talk about, and I just invite them up to speak as they have their hand up. I'll give you another 10 seconds or so, Percy, or else I'm going to have to move someone else. Oh, they put their hand down. Oh, they put their hand back up. Invite you to speak one more time. Interesting. I invited you to speak a few times. Let's try one more time, or else I'll have to move on. Oh, there you are, Percy.
Oh, okay. Here we go. Sorry, I'm using a mobile.
That's all right. That's all right.
Thanks for coming, Percy.
Yeah, no, I think this is cool. You guys are interesting and respectful. Okay, so
try to
I just have a question. I'm gonna write it down because I'm not a great extemporaneous speaker. So let me just read it if that's okay. So Tiber, you said something to the effect of, you cannot endorse a supernatural explanation until you have refuted all of the natural explanations, and that requires knowing all of the natural possibilities. I'm concerned that this sets the bar too high. To illustrate, imagine if we saw the stars rearrange in the night sky tonight to spell out the words, quote, Jesus Christ is Lord, in all of the Earth's languages. That would presumably be evidence for Christianity, even though there are naturalistic candidates available. For example, maybe a series of incredibly unlikely quantum fluctuations took place simply by chance. Contemporary physics does not rule that out. It just rates that as having a very low prior probability of happening. Notice that this particular naturalistic explanation seems implausible and inferior to the supernatural one, even though it has a probability greater than 0. Depending on what you mean by refuting all the naturalistic possibilities, that might suggest that the Jesus is Lord example wouldn't count as evidence for theism, but that doesn't seem right. So maybe there's something wrong with your evidentiary threshold for theism?
That's a great question, thank you, and I appreciated how you worded that out. Maybe the way you repeated it back makes it sound like something I might not agree with, so maybe I misspoke. But I guess what the way that I was imagining it, maybe allow me to rephrase and see if it makes any more sense or is clearer. I think what I was going for was, so in order for the supernatural to be demonstrated, I think, or rather, it's not even a matter of what would it take to demonstrate the supernatural. It's really a matter of how do you know that, because the reason I had said that was in response to, like, sort of talking about intelligent design, right? And that, this is the only explanation, or what it was the original argument that Thinker was making, where it was like, oh, well, it just seems so unlikely that things are the way they are, so it couldn't have been random chance, right? And the thing is, I think what I was thinking in response to that was, well, it's sort of, that sort of thought process is sort of coming from a place of ignorance, right? Because you're kind of saying, oh, well, it doesn't seem that way, so it must be, a god. Well, how did you determine that, that we've exhausted all of the options, to put it, simply, right? How do you know that we are in fact aware of all of the possibilities and are able to make a fair determination that God, because we don't know how to explain the supposed apparent randomness of things, it must be a god. I don't think we've really done the legwork yet, as, in terms of science, in terms of, investigation on some of the major questions we have about the origin of life and things like that, to sort of really make the solid, say, okay, we've gone through all the options, and we know, like, because, we can't imagine it being anything else, it must be a god. I think that's sort of like the line that Thinkercat was going with the justification on it, and I think what I said, was sort of a response to that. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, there's a few things you said there. I mean, the part I agree with is, totally agree with you that it would be very silly to infer that theism is true just because, quote, you make this declaration that I simply cannot imagine theism not being true, or I cannot imagine this being attributable to something other than theism. A person's inability to imagine something isn't evidence for a claim.
Right.
But one thing, though, that I find I want to resist in your comments is when you said what sounded like, if you haven't gone and exhaustively undertaken a study of all the possible naturalistic explanations and canvassed every possible theory, then you can't provisionally conclude that the current state of the evidence is supporting one particular hypothesis that happens to be supernaturalistic.
I don't think that's necessarily what I'm trying to go for, like a total exhaustion in order to be certain. I don't think we can be absolutely certain of anything. I don't think there's really a way around the problem of hard solipsism. So as far as absolute certainty, I don't think that's even possible. But
right.
In that same vein, I don't think that it would be necessary to exhaust all other possibilities in order to say, like, we don't need to know about like quantum physics in order to know that gravity, is a thing, right? And we have a current theory of gravity that seems to do a pretty good job of, helping us understand like the space-time forces. But again, like, we do know that quantum mechanics as a field is sort of turning, and I'm not a quantum, I'm not a quantum physicist or whatever, but we do know that there are certain aspects of quantum mechanics that sort of like, at the micro, that micro quantum level, gravity isn't necessary, gravity, the laws of physics, the Newton's laws of physics sort of break down at that level, right? So yeah, I don't think if I said it that way, that's definitely not how I meant it.
Yeah, I also someone actually asked me the other day, asked me, what would it take for you to believe in God? And I was like, I don't know, some sort of like ethereal God hand grabbing me and like a million other people simultaneously, while like all of society is recognizing it as such, and I'm like thrust into like a mind temporal dimension where I can see the past, future, and present.
See,
and I'm like, what's crazy shit like that, and everybody else recognizes it. I'll be like, sure, I'd believe in it. But
you know what's funny about that? Dandan and I actually disagree on that, because I think even if that happened to me, I don't think that would be enough for me to believe in a god. Because in my mind now, I'm thinking, wow, like, what if it's some like super alien that were like that had just like, because you know the famous saying, like, any advanced technology is virtually indistinguishable from magic, right? So in my mind, I'd be thinking of all the other possibilities, like, oh, what if this is just some alien like mind fucking the human race right now, right?
Yeah,
like,
I mean, presumably. So I guess one question I have is then, in that case, do you think that the made by God scenario, the Jesus is Lord scenario that I described, would be evidence for theism, or do you think you wouldn't break in favor of theism at all?
Right. So for me personally, I don't think that in and of itself would convince me that, you know, the Christian Bible, the Christian God is true. I think, but I would consider that evidence. Whether or not it's evidence enough to warrant belief in the claim, I don't think that it stands up to that for me. Because in my mind, I'd be thinking, what if that's an alien? You know, what if that's an alien manipulating people or whatever? Right?
Let me also piggyback on that, Percy. Too.
Wait. Can I?
Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, so all I would say, just one thing though, I think there's some binary thinking here. It's as if you think that you just have to believe the evidence supports only one hypothesis at a time. But actually,
no, not at all.
It's
not at all.
Right, okay,
it could support the Jesus hypothesis for sure.
Yeah, my sense would be if the made by Jesus, or if the Jesus is Lord scenario happened tonight in the night sky, that would be evidence for theism, but it would also be evidence for like the simulation hypothesis.
Right.
Be evidence
I mean, right. That's my point. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's actually what I want to.
But call us when that actually does happen, because that, as far as we know, that has actually never happened. Like people, like
right.
I know.
Well, so then the next step is to try to make the cosmic fine-tuning argument. So I had to start with your evidential methodology, because there would be no point in making the argument if we didn't agree about how to evaluate evidence. But
before we move on, I just want to also point out that if I saw in the sky, for example, like the stars arranged was like, and it said Moses received the tablets at Mount Sinai, which would be equivalent to a Jew as Jesus is Lord or whatever. The problem then would be that there's so much other shit, the baggage that would come along with that would make that piece of evidence have to be like, that would need to then deal with like, oh, the fact that a flood never happened, the fact that there's no evidence of anything being given in Mount Sinai, the fact there's no evidence of Jews in the desert, the fact that the evidence showed that the Torah was written 500 BC, the fact that it shows it had multiple authors, the fact that the prayers sometimes refer to God as a she because they're dealing with things buried in the ground, right? So like those pieces of evidence would be evidence towards confirming a specific notion of God rather than a deistic one, and that's where things start to become problematic. But alas,
yeah, I'm not arguing on behalf of a
specific
religious tradition. I'm just sort of making some points in favor of theism or deism, to be more well. We'll see. I guess it depends. So I would say probably if the cosmic fine-tuning argument works, then one implication of it is that this is a God who wanted to create life. This is a God who has a stake in human affairs, and that would be kind of a theistic interventionist deity. So it would provide some background evidence in favor of a particular traditional religion being true, but it wouldn't tell us which one was true. It wouldn't even tell us that one of them has to be true. It would just, whatever your original probability
it would just lay the foundation, and then there
be.
would still need to be more evidence supporting whatever God, specific God we would be talking about at that point.
That's right. So do you want to talk about the fine-tuning argument?
I mean, yeah, we definitely can. But I'll say off the bat, I think the biggest problem with fine-tuning is that, there's a lot of assumptions in the argument, and I think the main assumption I have a problem with, rather, is that, the argument sort of presupposes that there's like a possible way for things to have been different, or the constants, like the constants of physics, the constants of the universe could have been different, or that there were different possibilities when, again, that's just an assumption, right? Like we're saying, oh, it's finely tuned for this specific way, and if it were any different, things wouldn't be the way they are. But that's assuming that things could have been different. You know what I mean?
That's right. Yeah. Okay. So let me just tee it up for the audience in case no one's heard of it. So the cosmic fine-tuning argument for God is this argument that says that, I'll just quote Stephen Hawking, an eminent physicist who sort of lays out the case, quote, "The laws of science as we know them at present contain many fundamental numbers, like the size of the electric charge of the electron and the ratio of the masses of the proton and the electron. The remarkable fact is that these values of these numbers seem to have been very finely adjusted to make possible the development of life. If, for example, the strong nuclear force were 2% stronger than it is, while the other constants were left unchanged, diprotons would be stable. According to Davies, hydrogen would fuse into them instead of deuterium and helium. That would drastically alter the physics of stars and presumably preclude the existence of life similar to what we observe on Earth. And then perhaps the most extreme example of this kind of quote unquote fine tuning is the extremely low entropy state that the early universe was in. So when the initial cosmological singularity was present, our entropy was conveniently extremely low, even though, as far as we know from the laws of physics, there's no reason why it had to be. Those values could have occupied totally different numbers, all of which would have led to a situation where, or the overwhelming majority of which would have led to a situation where, like every particle would be so distant from every other particle that complex structures couldn't form, and then you wouldn't get living systems. So the idea is,
but if things were different, things were different, right?
Right. And there are no other universes for us to compare to. There is only the universe as we have of it, and the constants are the way they are.
Yeah. Okay. So can I respond first to this? So what you're raising is known in the philosophical literature as the necessitarian explanation, or the necessitarian objection to fine-tuning, which says that there just is no alternative way that life or that
I'm not saying there is no alternative way. I'm not saying there is no alternative way. I'm just saying that we don't seem to have a reason to believe there is an alternative way, as no alternative way has been demonstrated, right?
Yeah. Okay, so then, so let me reformulate the made by God, or the Jesus is Lord example, to put pressure on that claim. So imagine that it turned out we discover tomorrow that inscribed into every atom was the words Jesus is Lord in all of the Earth's languages, okay? And we discovered that this phenomenon was a direct result from the way the initial conditions and parameters of the early universe were set up, so that they occupied one particular value that led to this, and other values, according to our current understanding of physics, wouldn't have resulted in that.
Sure, I would say...
Wait, can I just finish this my sentence? So then my question is, would that be evidence for theism? I would say presumably it would be. But notice that's true.
I would agree with you.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
It would certainly be evidence for theism, but until that happens, I like that it's not evidence for theism, because we don't know that to be the case.
Yeah, if that was the case, that was the case.
To be clear, I'm not saying that happened.
No,
I'm just
saying I know. Yeah.
Yeah. No, all I'm saying is that what your objection would equally apply to that as it does to the real fine-tuning argument from the improbability of life, which is your objection was until we've demonstrated that the necessity, physical necessity, is false, until we've demonstrated that these alternative values could have obtained, we cannot conclude that any particular set of values are evidence for theism. But you've now contradicted yourself, because you're saying that...
I don't think I contradicted myself.
I think that Tibber explained from the beginning that he might have misspoke and wasn't exactly clear with what he was saying, because what we were trying to get at, or maybe it was just a friction of people don't always speak, they don't always mean exactly what it is they're trying to say. People fumble around their words all the time. Hey, I'm super guilty of doing this, just watch my live streams. But I think that what he was trying to get to is that you have to, because we have evidence of life emerging and life speciations happening through natural mechanisms, we first have to exhaust those as being completely wrong before we move to the supernatural one. Now, in your case, if there was that written on the DNA, yeah, of course, that would be evidence for something. But does that make sense?
But I don't. But I think that sort of diverged, Dandan. That sort of diverged because
the error that I tried. So remember, at the beginning, I tried to establish what your methodology was for evaluating evidence in the philosophy of religion. And it sounded like at the beginning we were in agreement that the made by God or the Jesus as Lord scenario would be evidence for theism. But notice that it would be evidence for theism despite the fact that we hadn't yet canvassed every possible naturalistic possibility.
Yes, because
just
we don't have
because
the
science is
so
wait, can I finish? Let me finish my thought.
Sure.
Just because science is inherently a provisional undertaking, it's incremental. You don't always have all of the information. You just have what you have at a given time. But you're allowed to, in an intellectually responsible way, make a determination about what direction the current state of the evidence points. And there's nothing wrong with that. And so, if you're willing to say that the Jesus as Lord scenario would be evidence for theism, even though we hadn't yet predetermined that the alternative values, that the values of the initial parameters of the universe could have been different, then you shouldn't raise the same objection to this claim that theism could explain the seeming improbability of the emergence of life.
Well, I'm not saying that theism can't explain it. We're saying that there's no evidence supporting that or any good evidence supporting that theism gives us an accurate account of or explains in any way the emergence of life. Right? It's a claim without evidence behind it. Now, it also depends.
Okay.
If we're talking about a deist God, that's one thing, right? And this way, I want to make the distinction. When we're talking about a deistic God or like a first cause argument, that is removed entirely from the I gave Moses rocks on top of the mountain God. These are two different things, right? Do we recognize this?
Yep. That's fine. Like I said at the beginning, I wasn't trying to argue on behalf of a specific religion.
I'm not trying to argue. So I'm saying, I think when Tibber was, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, was saying we need to exhaust the other things, the other naturalistic explanation. He's talking specifically about that in the context of like abiogenesis.
Yeah, there seems to be a confusion on what I've said. I think I'm just saying that I don't see the contradiction you're pointing out, because at the end of the day, if we're gonna argue about fine tuning, at the end of the day, there's a base assumption that things could have been different, right? That the core one of the core fundamentals of the fine tuning argument is that it's presupposing a certain range of possible value that the constants, the laws of the constants that we know of, could have been different, right?
Okay,
but
now
the constants are as they are, right? And we've been unable to change the constants. Well, let me finish. I've let you talk and finish your points too. I'm trying to point out that because at the end of you called in to talk about fine tuning, so I just want to again address and keep the focus on the fact that the main problem that I have, at least with it, I don't know if Dandan has this problem, is that the fine tuning argument assumes that there could have been any other way. Now, there's no contradiction. I'm saying, yes, even if those fanciful hypothetical scenarios happen, yes, they would be evidence for theism. Whether or not that's evidence that warrants a belief or is enough to say for certain that, the God is the answer, that's a whole nother thing. I'm not saying that they wouldn't be evidence. You could say that, you could say that evidence for, like evidence for gravity could be me floating in space or me dropping an apple in front of me. They're two completely different events, right? But they're evidence for the same thing. I'm not saying that the evidence, that evidence, I'm saying that there could be evidence for anything, for any claim, right? And there could be, there's tons of evidence for theism. Whether or not those evidences are enough to warrant belief in theism is different. But my point with the argument is that the argument isn't even evidence. It's an argument. It's a philosophical exploration. There is no actual evidence to the argument. The argument is just presupposing that if the strong nuclear force were 2% more, well, it's not though. The strong nuclear force is the strong nuclear force, and there's no way for us to know for sure that it could have been any different. So for us to presuppose that would be the case is a fatal flaw in the argument.
Okay, let me just ask what I hope will... So try to answer it briefly, okay? Like as close to a yes or no answer as you can. So do you think that the Jesus as Lord scenario would be evidence for theism. It's assuming that the reason Jesus is Lord was written into the atom was a direct consequence of the specific conditions, of the specific values that the initial parameters of the universe took on.
Yes, it would be evidence for theism, but again, it's never happened, and we don't know that it ever will happen or is the case.
Right, no, I understand. Obviously, though, the point of a thought experiment is to, like, consider the pure case and figure out the implications of your broader theory. It's not to describe the world.
I've admitted that would be evidence for theism, but
okay, but wait, now
this isn't this doesn't parallel pointing out the flaw in fine tuning, though, which is I think what you're doing, right? You're comparing my denial of this to your point. You're saying that it's a hypocrisy that I'm saying that saying that because we haven't pointing out the
ask the next question.
Okay.
The next question was going to be, so you're saying it would be evidence for theism. My next question was going to be, why do you think it's evidence for theism, given the fact that we don't know? Why couldn't I raise the same objection you raised, an analogous objection?
Because it's not an analogous situation. Because you're saying the claim is God is real. Right? The claim is God is... Not only the claim is God is real, when you're talking about a Lord is God type of thing, you're starting to get into like the Christian God type of thing.
I have something to say. So, I think the reason why it's not related is because while it's evidence for the reason that someone murdered someone, that they were at the same place, that's not enough evidence to warrant the belief that they're the murderer.
Okay, wait. So you're saying... I don't care whether you think it's strong enough evidence for you to become a theist against all of the other background beliefs you have. I'm just trying to figure out whether it's evidence to begin with. So it sounds like you're saying it is evidence to begin with. And you believe this despite the fact that it's still, we would still be in the situation in my Jesus is Lord scenario that we're in now with respect to fine-tuning of life, which is
no, we wouldn't.
We don't know that the parameters could have taken on different values. We don't know if they could be different
because
but you also don't know if they could.
One second,
right?
Let me speak.
Okay.
Let me speak. It wouldn't be exactly the same thing because one, we have priors for it would be a novel situation if Jesus is Lord is in the sky. It would be a novel situation to find on the DNA Jesus is Lord in every single language, right? That would be a novel, new situation. Without priors, we have no background on it. But we do have background on speciation. We have background on the emergence of life. And those priors let us know that just because there is some sort of problem we can't know for sure, that's not evidence of theism. Just because the universe could have been fine-tuned, that's fine. I mean, if your God is omnipotent, then fine-tuning doesn't even fucking make sense. It's how he can do whatever he wants. It can do whatever he wants. So there's a difference between novel situation with no priors and a situation where we do have priors. And when it comes to like life and complexity of life and complexity of how things operate in systems, we have priors with other explanations that are valid as compared to the theistic one, which are not valid, which is why we're more hesitant to accept those things as evidence for theism, as opposed to the novel situations of language being embedded in the stars or modern languages being embedded in like some nucleotide code. Those are very different situations.
Okay. It sounds like, though, they're susceptible to the specific objection that Tiber made, which was that until we've established that the parameters could have been different, we're not permitted rationally to say that any specific outcome of those parameters is evidence for theism. And what I think I've provided is a pretty persuasive counterexample to that, because it seems like you could still say to the Jesus is Lord scenario that we haven't yet established that that alternative parameters could have taken place, and yet it still appears to be evidence for theism, which means that simply raising this necessitarian possibility and saying we don't yet know that the parameters could have been different is not a sufficient response.
But the entire fine-tuning argument rests on the idea that if things were like that life is specifically tuned, that the universe is specifically tuned for life, and if anything were different, there wouldn't be life, and because of that, it must have been created by something. but we don't. So it's an argument that's making a claim about the existence of like justifying the existence of something, saying that because of that fact, well, not even a fact. Again, it's an assumption, and that's my point, though. It paints itself as a fact when it's really just making an assumption and then saying, oh, if this assumption were true, the only viable explanation would be God. Which,
and on top of that,
it's a claim that requires evidence.
And on top of that, the God that
hold on.
purports
Can I
to
respond
prove.
to that?
I want to talk to. I've been letting. I didn't get my chance to speak a little bit.
Let Dandan follow up with that, and then you could respond.
Yeah, of course, fair. And on top of that, the God that it attempts to prove is an all-powerful God, an omnipotent God. Well, an omnipotent God couldn't give a fuck, and everyone could do whatever they wanted. They could design the world with the weakest this force and that force and make it just so right that life can come about. To say that the fine-tuning argument actually nullifies the notion of an omnipotent God, as it's putting a constraint upon what God can't do or can do. And if things were different, God could make humans come about.
Wait, can I?
Whichever way.
Yeah, you can respond. Yeah, sorry. I won't go. You can go.
Yeah. I mean, okay. So I'm like, all of these objections equally apply to the Jesus is Lord scenario. So you just raised this objection where you said, well, if God is omnipotent, he could have used any other means. So why did he have to jigger with the initial parameters in order to create this surprising situation that seems to indicate that he's there? Well, you could just as easily say that about the Jesus is Lord scenario. You could say, oh, that must not be evidence for theism because if God really existed, he could have availed himself of any other way of putting those words there. He didn't need to use the parameters to do it.
But it's specifically saying Jesus is Lord. It's specifically pointing to theology. It's not just
theology, a specific religion.
It's
right?
novel.
That would be pointing to a specific religion.
Yeah, it's so novel. It's so extreme.
Well, then we can modify the example. So your point really doesn't. So just remember, I'm not claiming that the life. So if you want to modify the example to make it closer in that respect to the cosmic fine-tuning argument from life to theism, then just imagine instead of it saying Jesus is Lord, it just said God exists, or it said theism is true. Okay. It seems to me you would still say that was evidence for theism. You might think it's weak evidence. You might not think it's completely decisive evidence.
No, we're gonna have to go back because you keep ignoring this thing that we have priors of we've explored this question of how life came about, how there is speciation, and we have found naturalistic mechanisms. So now to go back and say, well, how do you account for them? We have accounting, that it has pragmatic utility, conceptual utility. It makes sense. It works. It just fucking functions, right? Richard Dawkins says science works, bitch. Like, this is a whole meme. As opposed to the stars realigning in some form. This is novel. It's unique. It's different. And it appeals to a specific notion. And you're going to have to contend with that. You're going to have to really think about the fact that you're not recognizing epistemic priors in this analogy.
Okay, so I think you are a little confused about what the scenario, the Jesus is Lord or the God exists scenario, was supposed to be. So it doesn't show. It's not intended to show that evolution didn't take place, because it's not an alternative explanation for why life diversified from a single cellular organism.
Sure, but we're
several
within the context
billion
of the
years
conversation.
I
understand.
Wait. Can I just finish this thought? So it's not arguing for an alternative to Darwinian theory about the diversification of life on Earth. It's just arguing that in order for that whole process to get started in the first place, there needed to be certain favorable background conditions so that complex structures could form, for example. So in other words, if the initial entropy of the universe had been very high, then what would have happened is that every particle would be several light years away from every other particle, such that you could never have a living system. And so the point is, the question we're trying to answer is, why is it that the parameters that the early universe took on were life permitting, when it seems like the overwhelming majority of alternative values would have been life prohibiting.
But that's another assumption.
Things were different.
No, but that's another assumption. That's one of the other hidden assumptions in the argument, is that the argument is too quick to assert that other values wouldn't result in life. Well, how do you know that? Have you been able to demonstrate that I mean, like, has there ever been a showing of different constants on, not resulting in life? No, we can't make for sure. That's an assumption. We can't say that for sure.
Can I respond to that?
Sure.
Yeah, so the response to this is, well, remember in the Stephen Hawking quote that I read, Stephen Hawking himself, a secular physicist, was affirming this claim that we do know what our current model of physics predicts would happen.
Yeah, but if you read the quote again, he was saying very specific things about what the effect of those changes may have done. But even those changes don't necessarily affect the full scope of the cosmos, nor do we have an understanding of how it affect the full scope of the cosmos. At the end of the day, Albert Einstein, Stephen Hawking, anybody can fucking say whatever the hell they want, And again, I think that might be a little bit of a...
I wasn't arguing because Stephen Hawking said this. It's true. I'm just saying it's indicative of the broader perspective of contemporary cosmology, which is it would be consistent. It would be perfectly consistent with mainstream science to say that most physicists do believe that we can coherently ask ourselves and intelligently answer the question if the values of our theories, of our equations that represent the natural world had different values. What would the scenario? What would be the resulting outcome? That's how all of engineering works. That's how all of physics
don't know.
Works.
That's the thing.
The thing is, we don't
know.
Wait, hold on. No, you're gonna have to let us finish. If physics was different, it will be different. If physics was different, we might not have life. Why is it that things are?
Life might be different. There might be something that's not a Homo sapien.
The question becomes, why are things the way they are? I don't know.
Yeah.
If things are the way they are because this is the way they are, to say that the universe exists in such a way that it creates life, it doesn't seem to me to be evidence of theism. It doesn't even deal with the notion of theism or the conception of God, where Jesus is Lord in the stars does. That's the difference.
Okay, so I think you're guilty of just an abject denial of a very mainstream assumption of contemporary physics, which is that when you have equations that represent natural states of affairs, you can predict what would happen differently if the values were different based on the relationship between the variables mathematically.
Yeah, but what if the values were
that assumption is built into all of
because the values were different,
physical sciences.
Because the values were different, we had other forces acting upon? What if things were different here and there? It would create a whole other thing where gravity wouldn't function the same way, which create other forces. We are now appealing to our ignorance. If things were different, they would be different, and we don't have to go past that.
So is an engineer appealing to his ignorance when he uses the Newtonian equations of motion and hydraulic force in order to make predictions? Wait, just let me finish a fucking question.
No, because an engineer is not.
You have finished questions, to be fair.
Yeah,
to be very fair, you finished many statements in
I don't understand why I'm not allowed to
appealing
finish
to his ignorance.
You are, but the problem is when we start.
Wait, then let me finish the question in that case.
I'm gonna mute you. An engineer is not appealing to their ignorance because they're literally dealing with priors of evidence for their conclusions. They not only test their formulas. They don't just have a formula and then go ahead and believe that it works. They fucking try to test it. And then once they test it, they verify that their formula does in fact work. When we say appealing to ignorance, I'm simply saying if we don't know how the universe is going to be different and be different, therefore that's evidence towards God. That's not evidence towards anything. That's just me not knowing something and then saying that's evidence towards God.
We seem to be stuck on the notion, so Dandan, I think the main issue here, and it doesn't seem like we'll move past it, is there needs to be a way we can get through the, because the suggestion is that we're being hypocritical in that because that we're saying that if we can take Lord is God or theism is real in DNA as evidence for theism, then we shouldn't be saying that fine-tuning defeats itself. That's the main problem that needs to be addressed here, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess, do you think Stephen Hawking in that quote was making an quote unquote argument from ignorance when he said that if the parameters were different, we would have a life non-permitting or a life prohibiting universe as opposed to a life permitting universe?
No, I think that what he said was, if the parameters were a little different, we wouldn't see human life, or we wouldn't see
Yeah, I
life
think
as
what
we
he's
know
saying
it.
is
And
life
I think
as
that's
we
fine.
know it, right? Like life as we know it wouldn't exist, right? Is that the quote? Which is true, because life, if any of the parameters were different, again, that's an assumption, but if they were different, then yeah, it would be very, very likely that us, Earth as it is, or whatever that would be here, and it's like it would be different. It wouldn't exist as we know of it, but that doesn't mean that other life wouldn't exist or whatever, right?
Or that God therefore made the world. That wouldn't be evidence for theism. It'd be evidence. It's just a statement of things would be different if they were different. And I don't know how you don't see that.
Let me.
I appreciate you, Percy. Though, thank you. This is a very interesting discussion, though. So
we've been on call for
you.
a while. I want to make sure if anyone else wants to talk, we only have about 10 to 15 minutes left of the show. After the show, we will be hanging out in the Pangburn Discord a little bit, and then maybe we'll be a little bit here later. So everyone's welcome to come and join. I wanna also thank you, Percy, for being a great interlocutor. And I would definitely love to have continued conversations with you.
Yeah, I would love to talk to you again, honestly, Percy.
Yeah, but we're not done with this conversation.
It's unfortunate that we can't do it like in a longer form show. We would love to like really like sit and talk to you and dig with you more, but we definitely appreciate talking to you.
Yeah, so I'm not hanging up on you. I just want to remind the room that other people can raise their hand and we will take them, because until that happens, I guess we'll keep you on. So
okay.
Also politically, if you're a libertarian or a Trump supporter, you're an idiot. Now raise your hand.
I'm a libertarian, so we could talk.
That can be a different conversation for a different time, my friend.
So I'm gonna because I want to be
intellectual. Last word, Percy. Go ahead.
Okay, I want to practice intellectual humility and just make a concession. So Tiber, you said that the Stephen Hawking quote was just specifically referring to what would
life
would
as
be,
we know it. I think
life
if
we know it.
Yeah.
Right. That's right. As opposed to life as
in general,
conceivable,
right?
or in general.
Right.
Right. So you're correct about that. That's the specific value that the specific parameter he was talking about. This was the strong nuclear force. Wouldn't have as broad or as extreme of an effect on the life permitting nature of the universe as other possible changes that could happen. But that was just one example. So there is this book by Roger Penrose, Cycles of Time, who I believe is also a secular physicist, where he says, if you'll allow me, I'd like to just quote this one paragraph. It's only
go ahead.
three sentences. Okay, so he says, perhaps the most impressive example is the initial entropy of the universe, which was ridiculously low. According to the traditional Big Bang theory, the universe originated in a giant explosion about 14 billion years ago. At its beginning, the universe had an incredibly low entropy. According to one estimate, if you randomly picked a possible initial state for a universe, the probability of picking one with such a low entropy is about 1 in 10 to the power of 10 to the power of 124. The low initial entropy, in turn, is crucial to explaining life and everything else in the universe that we care about. And then he says,
well, this has been more than 3 sentences.
Yeah, it's fine. I like it, though. That's definitely worthy of its own discussion, that quote, but that might go beyond the scope of the time we have. So,
Bop, whenever you want, you can jump in. Percy, thank you so much for talking with us. Of course, I enjoyed it. I know Tiber's enjoyed it. And
really, thank you so much, Percy. I'd love to talk to you again.
Yeah.
Okay, I appreciate it, guys.
Thank you very much. So, Bimp Bop, you raise your hand to come on. Do you want to jump on, or have you decided that you don't want to jump on anymore? Oh, hello.
Yeah, there was a slight problem. I was on mobile. It doesn't work on mobile.
Your mic is extremely low. Do you mind somehow either raising your volume, getting closer to your microphone so we can hear you
Yes, is
properly?
this any better?
It is better.
Little
Any way to
better,
make
yeah.
it even better?
Okay, wonderful. I was wondering, how do you think we can get everybody on the same page, not in this call in general, and do you think that's necessary?
Same page in regards to what?
Politically and spiritually.
Okay. So my friends and I have a trope: education. Education is extremely important. But I think that when it comes to I think the same. Okay, I don't think it's possible to get everyone on the same page when it comes to our specific beliefs. But I think that we can get on the same page when it comes to our outlook about how to live with our neighbors. And I think that's the most important thing politically we have to worry about.
100% agreed.
We're going to disagree on, because we each have different needs politically. We also have different needs spiritually. So, like, for example, I might be
whatever spiritually means to you. Sorry.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Right.
So I think that the solution isn't to try to get everyone to believe the same thing. I think that's a mistake we can see from the beginning of the 20th century, where there was actually propaganda outlets and we tried to get everyone to believe the same thing. That doesn't seem to work. What I think we can do is get everyone on the same page with how we ought to interact with one another, even when we disagree. And I think that's where we have to focus on. And that comes with inclusion. That comes with exposing ourselves to other viewpoints, learning about other religions, learning about other ideas, and learning about how to live in a community with people who we disagree with. That's what I think.
Sure. I'm in pretty much full agreement. Yeah, I think it's pretty much impossible to actually get people to agree. I think that universally agrees on spiritual stuff and politics. Pretty much everything Dandan said, and I think the best we can do is teach people to be skeptics, teach people to just be as knowledgeable as they can and not just come to conclusions on things without a good amount of without a reasonable amount of evidence for whatever claim it is they're trying to examine, and making sure that that fundamental principle is ingrained in people, I think, is the best we can do. Maybe I'm wrong, but yeah.
What are your thoughts on it,
like Mr. Rogers guy?
Huh? What'd he say? What'd you say?
Do you like that Mr. Rogers guy?
I actually hate Mr. Rogers. Oh my god.
Mr. Rogers is great. I don't know what the fuck I was
talking
about.
I wanted to watch Ninja Turtles chop each other's heads off. That's all I cared about. Let's just be real. It's not an easy task to get people who disagree to get along. Hey, I come from an Orthodox Jewish background. Jews can't even. So where I live, there's a synagogue popping up every 5 seconds, a new synagogue. Even people who believe the same thing theologically don't want to share the same synagogue because they say their prayers a little differently, or want to have a different rabbi for this kashrut and a different rabbi for this kashrut. Because it's not about what we believe, but it's rather about how do we work with each other when we disagree. It's like a healthy marriage, I'm lucky to have lived with the experience of seeing a married couple and live for 37 years together. And I have seen them hate each other and love each other simultaneously, disagree, and consistently live amongst each other and work through life together. And I think that's what we have to reestablish as a country and as a community.
There's been, I think, the partisanship, not just politically, but even on little things. There's this epidemic of, do we even know who our neighbors are anymore? You know what I mean? And maybe that was always a sentiment, going back for a long time now. But it feels like now more than ever, it's like we don't even know who lives next to us anymore. We don't. It feels like in a lot more places than just the more urban places, you have people who don't even give anybody the time of day, don't say hi, feel uncomfortable just being around people in general, right? There's this huge social anxiety, I think, that a lot of us have been noticing in general.
And to piggyback on top of that, Tibber, this is why I detest libertarianism so much, because it reinforces this division within individuals. It kind of it individuates us. No, it individuates us by dividing it, right? Individuates. One of these adjectives or verbs, it separates human beings from actually cooperating and forces us to be one against each other in this type of like marketplace capitalistic workforce where we're supposed to somehow be united as a nation but consistently competing with our neighbors. No, that can't be the case. We have to learn to work together. Maybe I'm just like some, I don't know, liberal at heart, but I've said this a million times. And I obviously, yeah, I'm Jewish. I'll say it again. The story of Hanukkah is one of my favorite ones. Why? Because the messages were each one little lights, but all together were a mighty flame. And that's like what I think we have to recognize when it comes to society and how to build it together.
I don't know. What are your thoughts on that, Bibimbap?
I'm not really here to argue. I'm just here to ask questions.
No, yeah, no, not even as an argument. You know, just feel free to add something to that,
yeah, because,
or just what your thoughts are.
Yeah, say your last thoughts because the show is actually over. We're right at the end mark.
Other than a tight group and the little surrounding corners, I think generally as a political body, the United States can't even agree on what libertarianism is.
Yes,
so
yes.
Very true. Very true.
Different.
And I think there's a lot of different kinds of libertarians, and I think libertarianism, like a lot of group definitions, mean different things to different people. You know, like being a Republican means, or being a Democrat or whatever, means something different to everybody who consider themselves one, right? So, you know, it's a difficult thing to sort of tackle when you're sort of tackling it from, you know, the sort of generality of it rather than the specific, you know, case by case basis of it.
So, Bimbop, thank you so much for coming on. I really, really appreciate it. You asked great questions. You were cordial as ever. And my first experience here on politics and religion has been great. So I want to thank the mods and the admins on the server. I want to thank everyone for really giving us this partnership has been fantastic, and I hope to continue it in the future. I
would love to do this again, and maybe with more time on the clock, because
maybe more time.
I was loving those discussions, and I would love to be able to next time have discussions with Thinkercat and Percy again if they would like, and to maybe stay, you know, dig deep into the specifics, into the specific things that we were hung up on, and sort of focus in on a specific topic or thing rather than sort of jumping around, you know, because I think there's a lot of value in sort of exploring those specific,
of course,
you know, the most pressing points that we were stuck up on. So I appreciate all
for
of you.
The after show, in about 5 minutes after I think I get a drink and maybe use the bathroom, we're going to go to the Pangburn Discord. I link the link in the chat if you guys want to come. Also, in September 5th, we're going to have, I'm going to have on my show, Cornel West is going to be on the show. In November, we're going to have Reza Aslan here. Tomorrow, I'm actually interviewing a feminist, a strong, I think, trans radical feminist. I don't remember exactly what her name is because I'm taking over for someone else's show. Also, for everyone who know, on October 13th at 7 p.m. in the Vancouver Playhouse, Lawrence Krauss is going to be giving a speech with Travis Pangburn. That's also an event that's live if anyone's in that area want to go to it. And as always, what do I say? I usually say, stay thinking.
Thank you so much, everybody. Stay squeaky.
Stay squeaky. Let me just end.